Today I'm making a recipe that a lot of people love, but I think almost nobody has made themselves from scratch before. Today we're making pork bone tea, or as it's known in Malaysia and Singapore, Bak Kut Teh. Bak Kut Teh is one of my favorite foods of all time. I guess it's a herbal Chinese soup, originally from Klang outside Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, but very popular throughout Malaysia's Chinese community and Singapore as well. And you know, most of us grow up eating it either out at hawker centers or Bak Kut Teh restaurants, or we make it from packets at home. You know, it's very common to buy packet Bak Kut Teh, and if you want to know what it tastes like without having to try and make it yourself, just go buy a Bak Kut Teh packet from a Chinese grocer. It's a little sachet of medicinal herbs that you can boil with some of your pork and other things together, and you get a pretty decent Bak Kut Teh. It might look a bit daunting, but I promise you it is an awful lot easier than it looks. The herbs, you probably would need to take a trip to at least an Asian grocer's, potentially a herbalist as well to get some of them. But once you've got them, it's a very, very simple dish. I know you don't believe me, but let's get into it anyway. I'm gonna start by parboiling the pork that I have here. I've got some pork ribs and some pork belly. Bak Kut Teh traditionally uses also things like stomach, tripe, liver, whatever you like to go in there, hocks and things as well. I'm gonna keep it pretty simple. We'll just start with the ribs. And this is some pork belly here with the skin on. Put that in some cold water so it's submerged. I'll put that on the stove, bring it to the boil and boil for about, I'd say 15 to 20 minutes until it's just cooked through. Now this here is where the action is. These are the Chinese medicinal herbs that are gonna go into making our Bak Kut Teh broth. You're not gonna find this at your regular supermarket. I'm not pretending like you will, but they're very easy to come by in an Asian grocer's. I'm gonna go through these, but don't worry if you can't follow along. Just go to the link below. It'll take you to the recipe where all of these are written out in English, as far as they do have English names, but also in Chinese. I'll go through kind of roughly what they are. So what do we have here? Cassia, this is the outer bark of cinnamon. Smells like cinnamon. You could substitute cinnamon if you wanted to. Now this is polygonatum, in Chinese known as yuzu. It's hard to describe these aromas, but they're herbal. So we've got 20 grams of that there. This is chuanxiong. Chuanxiong is lovage root in English. But a lot of these herbs actually don't have well-known names in English anyway. A lot of them have the scientific names. You know, this is shudi, which is Rehmannia glutinosa in English. This is what gives Bak Kut Teh its dark color. You know, a lot of people use soy sauce for that. It's actually better if you're using Rehmannia or shudi for that as well. This is angelica root, dangui in Chinese. This and the chuanxiong are two herbs that have a very pronounced aroma. I'm just putting these all into a piece of muslin, cheesecloth, I guess you could call it as well. Tangshen, codonopsis root. This is some licorice root, nice easy one in English there. Of course, an aniseed type flavor to that one as well as some star anise. And this is chengpi, which is dried tangerine peel. Very kind of citrusy aroma. And last but not least, some pepper. I'm using Sarawak pepper from Malaysia. And that is our pack of Bak Kut Teh spices. I just want to wrap this up now. Just wrap it in the cheesecloth so that it doesn't escape. And you can secure this with, I'm using a bit of string, but you could use some non-colored rubber bands as well if you preferred, because these are going to infuse and give us the flavor base for our soup. There we go. Now this and these here, just some shiitake mushrooms, which I've not soaked, but I've just rinsed. I want to use the mushrooms, the herbs, and the garlic to form the basis of what's going to be our Bak Kut Teh broth or our soup at the end. These I'll just bring to the boil in the water, and then I'll strip off the stems a little bit later before I put the pork in. The herbs will be fine just as they are, and the garlic, you could cut the whole head in half if you wanted to, but it's quite common to see it just left whole like that, so I'm going to leave it whole as we are. Into about 4 liters of water over on the stove. I'll bring that to a simmer and simmer it probably for about half an hour. The pork's coming along nicely. I'll just keep skimming the scum off that so it doesn't add too much of a porky smell. The mushrooms are softened, so I'll scoop those out, snip off the stalks, and then get them back in. You can really see how nice this is becoming now. A lot of that color is coming out of the Romania, the shudi, and that's giving us that lovely Bak Kut Teh color. I'm going to give this a really quick rinse just under some cold water just to get rid of a little bit of that scum on the outside, because I don't want that scum to go into the broth. You know, we boiled it separately to keep a lot of that out of the broth, so I don't want to put that in there as well. There's not a lot there because we did a pretty good job of skimming the pork, but just the little bits around the edges there, I'll just rinse off with a bit of cold water. Now we just need to cut this up. Kind of an important point for Bak Kut Teh is it starts off being parboiled big, so in these big kind of pieces. And then when we move it to the soup, we need to cut it into medium-sized pieces. And then when we end up serving it, it's going to be in small pieces. So kind of big, medium, small is how you get the best results out of your Bak Kut Teh. For a slab of pork belly like this, around 2 kilos, I would say. I'm just going to cut that into, let's say, 5 centimeter wide strips. Now these ribs, I'm probably just going to cut in half. So this can now go into our boiling soup. Now at this point, the smell of our Bak Kut Teh broth is incredible. But I'm going to taste it before I put the pork in, because it tastes terrible. We haven't seasoned this at all. It's had none of the pork go in there. But I think it's important to taste it now so you can tell kind of where you're trying to get to. Because by knowing that you're starting here where it's got no salt, no sugar, really just a lot of bitterness from a lot of the herbs that are in there, that will let you know how you need to season your Bak Kut Teh to get to the point where we want to at the end. So I'm going to put the pork in first, and I'm going to add some of our seasoning, because having the pork in there is going to add a little bit more umami, a little bit of depth, you know, rather than just this kind of light medicinal type of broth. So I'm going to put in some salt and some sugar. You know, a really important point, you don't want to overcook the pork for Bak Kut Teh. You want it to be kind of al dente. You know, you don't want it to fall apart. This is not a soft, melting pork belly dish. Soup with firm pork belly is what you're going for. So no more than about half an hour for these bits of pork belly and pork rib. And then after we take that out, we'll season our soup again. So while the pork is simmering, there's just a couple of other ingredients that I want to put in at the end. Some tau pop, or deep fried tofu puffs, I guess they're called, or sponges. And these are perfect, because Bak Kut Teh is all about the soup. And these, I'll show you inside. When you cut them, they're like a little sponge. And this will soak up all of that wonderful soup. We'll put all of these things in when we take the pork out and finally balance the broth. I've also got some enoki mushrooms. To prepare those, I just cut off the base and then just break these into little clumps. Not each individual mushroom, but a small clump is what you're going to want just to eat at the end. And these tofu puffs, just cut those in half. Okay, so I've let this go for a little bit longer, about 45 minutes. The pork is now tender, but not falling apart. So this is the perfect point to start taking the pork out. We can taste this again and start to season before we add in our remaining ingredients. That is delicious. It has changed absolutely completely from where this was 45 minutes ago. You know, the pork has given a really strong umami taste to the broth. The seasoning, the salt, the sugar that we put in there has really lifted the soup, obviously. But it's still got quite a lot of bitterness from those herbs that we put in there in order to balance the taste of this broth. And this is one of the real drawbacks with having a packet Bak Kut Teh. When you're balancing the taste, you've kind of got to get rid of some of that bitterness. You still want some of the bitterness there, but you don't want to do that with sweetness. And I think a lot of the packaged Bak Kut Tehs are way too sweet because they try to balance out the bitterness with sweetness. You actually want to balance the bitterness with both salt, touch of sugar, but actually vinegar. A tablespoon of vinegar into this is going to cut back on that bitterness, a little bit more salt to help with that as well. And this will be a perfectly balanced broth. If you want more of a, I guess, a stronger flavor or a richer flavor, then substitute some of that salt for soy sauce as well. I use a couple of tablespoons of soy sauce and that's about it. And most of the rest is just salt. We'll take out the spice pack. Be sure to really squeeze that out to get all of the liquid back into the broth. Taste the broth again. And it is perfect. Now we can throw in our remaining ingredients, the tofu and the enoki mushrooms. The pork's cooked, the soup is ready. It's time to kind of put it all together. So, I'll take some of my ribs and some of the pork belly too, and just slice those to portion sizes. You know, this is how we're going to be eating it. And this is just the texture you want, you know. It's tender enough, but it's not falling apart. If this is falling apart, you're losing the soup. You really do need this to be al dente. And our ribs too, I'll just cut those into individual kind of rib sections. This cartilage as well is really nice in a dish like this. And onto this, we'll throw our soup. Finish it with a bit of spring onion, touch of coriander. Serve it with some of these. This is youtiao, Chinese oil stick or a bread stick. And that is a lot easier than it might seem. Bak Kut Teh.